Good morning, everyone. By my count, it's 9 a.m. So welcome to Friday and the last day of the Bilingual Directors Meeting Week. We have all made it this far. So my name is Josie Yangos. I'm director at the Illinois Resource Center. And thank you all for being such faithful attendees this week at all the various live sessions. We really appreciate that. I want to do some acknowledgements. First off to the Illinois State Board of Education and to the Department of Multilingual, and at the helm, Joanne Clyde. Just a few months ago, we were all scratching our heads trying to figure out what we're going to be doing during this time for bilingual directors, and it's been just absolutely wonderful to collaborate with ISBE Multilingual and Joanne and her staff on having this virtual meeting. So hats off to Joanne and the team at ISBE. Thank you. And I'd really be remiss if I didn't also acknowledge all the wonderful staff at the IRC, our specialists, who I hope you'll check out their pre-recordings that are available here on Crowd Compass, as well as the wonderful IT support that we've had throughout the week from the IT team, including our webmaster, Kim Scannell, and especially a big shout out to all the administrative support and everyone from the IRC in shepherding this 5-day week, this 5-day conference. So thank you all to my colleagues at the IRC. A sincere thank you. A couple of logistical pieces. Later on in the day, after the end of the Bilingual Directors meeting, you will be getting an evaluation that we ask you to fill out. And after you fill out that evaluation, you'll also receive an evidence of completion form that will give you 12 professional development hours for this presentation. So, but please, please, please fill out the evaluation. It's the only evaluation we've sent out during this week, so it'll be wonderful to hear from you about that. Don't forget that later on this morning, as you can see in the notes, at 11, we have a session on a Q&A on assessment and accountability. I already see that Barry Pedersen is already in this session, so I know that he and his other colleagues will be happy to field questions from you regarding the state of assessment this coming year, especially regarding English learners. And this afternoon at 1 o'clock, we're going to have our third roundtable on dual language with a number of bilingual directors who will be speaking about their dual language programs. So I encourage you to attend that as well. And I would be remiss also if I didn't use this opportunity to talk about all the professional development activities that we offer at the IRC. I'm hoping that Rosie is just put in, thanks Rosie, the website for our professional learning in the chat. That includes professional learning opportunities for educators. We've been going online between now and through at least February, doing a combination of webinars and professional learning modules. So please encourage your teachers to check them out. We've been trying to offer them at various times, acknowledging all the demands that are on people during especially these initial few months of whether it be remote learning or hybrid learning or in-person learning. These are all very challenging times. We've also, for those of you who are administrators, there are also admin academies that we offer in conjunction with IPA. I suggest that you check those out. The big secret is those are free. Normally, a lot of admin academies are not free, but the ones that we offer through IRC in conjunction with IPA are. So please take advantage of those. And I've been hearing a lot about coursework and encouraging teachers to get their endorsements. Please make sure to also check out on that same webpage. And I'm going to ask Rosie to put it in again, since I'm delighted that everyone's saying good morning today to all of us, to put it into the chat, our website. But also we offer all the courses needed for the bilingual and ESL sequence. through National Louis University. All our courses this fall, as well as this coming winter, will be online. So it's a great opportunity for teachers to and educators to get their endorsements. And we'll also be having, we don't have many details yet, but we will be sending out forthcoming, we'll be having more information about upcoming conferences. I do want to also take this moment to, I'm going to put on my my hat as a board member of the Illinois Association for Multilingual Multicultural Education, and encourage all of you, please, 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 to participate in next month's ISBE virtual budget hearings. And I'm gonna ask Maggie to put that into the chat. Also, this is your opportunity to talk about the needs of English learners in your district. And this is the first time ISBE is doing budget hearings virtually. They're going to be taking place on 3 days in October, on October 7th in the evening from 4 to 7, and on October 14th and 16th from 1 to 4. Please consider signing up to testify orally, or better yet, have a parent in your district offer testimony, and you would get even bonus points if they could provide testimony in their native language. Just as in school boards, parents can deliver compelling testimony. It works the same at the ISBE budget meetings, so please make sure to consider participating, and or at the very least presenting written testimony as well. And if you have any questions about this, I'll be happy to chat with anybody about the upcoming budget hearings, but this is a real plea to please participate. So I think I'm done with my my announcements for this morning, and so it's indeed my pleasure to turn over the microphone over to the virtual microphone over to my colleague Maggie Essig. Maggie's been with IRC for the last 5 years. It's been an absolute blessing and wondrous addition to our staff here at the IRC. Maggie has walked in your shoes, having been an administrator as well as a teacher in with working with English learners. And added bonuses also with Maggie is that she knows such a variety of different topics, including gifted education, bilingual special ed. It's just a myriad of topics, but in particular, Maggie has such a passion for issues around technology. In fact, she offers the technology course that's part of our IRC course sequence through National. So that's always wonderful. But Maggie has especially a passion regarding the integration of technology and language learning. She's part of a first cohort of ISTE, which I always managed to mangle, which I believe is it's essentially a national consortium on national standards of technology and education. So Maggie's been part of that cutting edge group. So this is really a treat for all of us to have Maggie here presenting on collaboration and co-teaching, which I know I've been seeing that as a topic. People asking questions about that in the chat during the course of the week. So take it away, Maggie. Thanks.
Thanks, Josie. I will share my screen so you can all see. Okay, let's present that. So I came across this topic in a couple different ways. So like Josie said, one way was that when we sent out a survey to all of you, this was one of the topics that really came back as people wanting to talk about how are we collaborating in remote learning. But I also came across it a bunch of times in other EL related groups that I'm a part of. So I'm a part of a couple on Facebook, and all the recurring comments tended to be like, you know, what's my role in this? What's, you know, I'm a language teacher, I'm the EL teacher, I'm the bilingual specialist. What's my role in remote learning? You know, how are people doing it? So I really started to dive in to that at that point. And so these are kind of like things I've been thinking about since then. The URL to this presentation will be at the bottom of all the slides, so in case you lose it or need to come back. Again, my name is Maggie Essig. I work at the Illinois Resource Center. And like Josie said, I've been there for a while, and I really enjoy talking about using instructional technology as a catalyst for language development and for content learning. And so this, I feel like I've been talking about, using technology and really meaningfully and purposefully using technology to support students. And, not everyone was on board all the time. But, now COVID happened and everyone had to be on board. So I really enjoy getting to talk about this. I wish it was under better circumstances, but I do like sharing what I like to talk about with technology. So today's structure, we're going to talk about what does collaboration or co-teaching look like for ELs in remote learning. So I'm acknowledging that co-teaching is a type of collaboration. Not everyone does co-teaching, but everyone does some sort of collaboration with their language specialist, their EL specialist, their bilingual specialist. There's some sort of collaboration going on. So what does that collaboration look like? And as I started to kind of tease out my ideas and see how I was thinking about things, I noticed that these examples were starting to fall into the seven co-teaching models for ELs that Andrea Honingsfeld and Maria Dove write about. So that's how I decided to separate them for today. So we're going to look at these kind of examples of what is a role of a language specialist in collaboration in remote learning. And yes, it's under a co-teaching model, but I'd like you to think about it more broadly as just collaboration, right? It can be co-teaching, but it could also be other forms of collaboration. It just happened to fall nicely into these little categories. And then after that, we're going to look at some tools that I think should be in everybody's remote learning toolkit. Okay, so a note on the focus. So again, focusing on collaborating in remote settings. There's the number of variables that are involved in face-to-face or hybrid or blended is just astronomical, and we have less than an hour. So we can't address that today. However, I'm really happy to talk with people about specifics of your situation. So if that's the case and you want to talk about something a little bit more, feel free to email me, tweet me. We can get in touch and kind of talk about your specifics, because I want to make sure that we talk about what we need to talk about today, but then you also get what you need leaving this session. Speaking of examples, I try to give examples that are inclusive of grade levels, English language proficiency levels, and subject areas, but I really can't cover all of that, especially in an hour. So when I talk about examples, try to consider them with an open mind and think about how you may want to tweak an idea or something I say to fit your context. And if you're not sure how that would be, please ask. This definitely isn't an exhaustive list of ways to collaborate. It's really just a starting point. It's where I've been thinking, currently, and I really would like it to be a jumping off point for you. And so that also brings me to a point I want to make about questions. If you have a question, please put it in the chat box and put a Q preceding the question. And Josie will collect those, and then we'll have certain points at the presentation where I'll stop and ask for questions, and I'll answer the questions that I can. I've heard that the questions have been a little light in some of the sessions, so please ask questions, a lot of questions. I really want to make this presentation tailored to what you guys need. Okay, so just covering some of the basics that we should kind of get out in the open. Collaboration and co-teaching work best when the roles are fluid. So when I talk about some of these examples, I'll say teacher A or teacher B, or one teacher and another teacher, and I really don't mean that teacher A is always a content teacher and teacher B is always the language specialist. That's not what I mean at all. Co-teaching and collaboration work best when people and teachers are swapping roles and really working together like that to always adjust to the situation. And I'll talk about collaboration, and we'll talk about co-teaching as a subset of collaboration, but it's important to note that it's not really co-teaching if co-planning, co-assessment, and co-reflection aren't part of the process. So it's really important that if we're asking teachers to collaborate remotely, that we give them the time to do that. And I know that's easier said than done, but it has to be said. And we're all working with constraints that we couldn't have even imagined a year ago, and you're all doing the best you can. So I wanted to say thanks for all the hard work you're doing for all the students in Illinois, all the language learners, and hopefully we'll have a little fun and talk about some ways to use technology. So this is kind of how I feel. This is one of my favorite quotes from 30 Rock, but I tweaked it a little bit to be like, what a year, and it's only September. So again, thank you for all your work. It's almost unfathomable how much you've gotten done in just a couple weeks. So when I talked about those co-teaching models, here's how my examples kind of fell. There's 7 co-teaching models that I just want to kind of go over first so that we're all on the same page. So the first 3 include one group of students. So the first one is there's a lead teacher, and then there's a teacher who teaches on purpose. And we're going to dive into these a little bit deeper. The second one is 2 teachers teach the same content to the same group. The third, one teacher teaches, another teacher assesses. Then we jump to the models that include 2 groups of students. So the fourth one rather is 2 teachers teach the same content but 2 separate groups. The next 2 are very similar. One teacher pre-teaches and the other teacher teaches alternative information. And then the next one is one teacher reteaches and another teaches alternative information. And then finally, we have multiple groups of students, which is like kind of more like stations, where 2 teachers just monitor and teach multiple groups of students. So let's dive into these a little bit more. One of the questions I usually get asked a lot, and I can't see the chat right now, but who knows, it may have already come in, but which model works best? And so as we're going through this, I'd like you to focus less on if it works, period, and instead focus on whether it works for whom, how, when, and why. It needs to make sense in your context. What works for someone may not work for you, and what works for you may not work for them. So it's important to think about your students, your staff, and who's doing the collaborating. Okay, so in the little pictures that are going to come up, the X's are the teachers and the O's are the students. So again, this is how I'm kind of thinking about what is the role of the language specialist when we're collaborating remotely. And I tried to think of what it would look like synchronously, so everyone's kind of online together, and what it would look like asynchronously, where people are logging in at different times. So in this first example, one lead teacher and one teaches on purpose. Teachers take turns assuming this lead role. And so one teacher leads instruction while the other provides mini lessons to individuals or to small groups to either like pre-teach or clarify something. And so what I'm thinking, and this is the one where I have the most examples because this is the one that you see most often and tends to kind of work with a lot of collaborating with language specialists. So ideas that I had were one teacher teaches the class and another teacher is supporting that by making things visual or adding sensory supports or supporting somehow with a language support. Another idea is one teacher teaches and another teacher either rephrases or presents information in a more linguistically appropriate way for language students. And so this could be with an individual student, with a small group. And again, it doesn't mean that the language teacher, the language specialist is always the one with the small group, right? We can switch those roles and they should be fluid. I always tell the story that when I was teaching, I had a student who wasn't one of my students, wasn't an English learner, but he came up to me and said, like, when do you get to be a real teacher? And I said, well, I am a real teacher. And he's like, no, no, no. Like, when do they give you a class? And I realized that he thought like that I was, had worked my way up from the mailroom, and they were giving me small groups of language learners so I could prove myself as a teacher before I would get a big class, right? And that's how the students saw me. And so we don't want that to always be, the case. We want those teachers to be seen as equals and those students to be seen as equals. So that's why this, being fluid with these roles is really important. Next, we're talking about one teacher is teaching and another teacher makes connections to the student's background knowledge or prior experiences. And this is really key because when we're talking about what is the role of a language specialist, this really makes a lot of sense to me, because when you're planning a lesson, you're doing a lot of work. You don't always have time to make those emotional connections or sociocultural connections. You don't always have time to bring in the student's background information and kind of do that other side of the work. But when you have two teachers, you can split the work like that. And you can have someone who kind of makes those connections and brings the students' lives into the instruction while someone else focuses on the actual instruction. So it really is a nice kind of delineation of responsibility. Another idea I thought was one teacher could teach a scaffolded lesson that accounts for language and content, and then the other teacher supports students' emotional needs and cultural background to be reflected. Again, some of the stuff that can get left by the wayside when you're overwhelmed and trying to plan all remote learning, that you've never had to do before. So it's nice to have these two groups, have someone else who can make sure that the students' cultural connections are there. So things are resonating with them. It's making sense for their schema. So sometimes that involves a lot of, prep. And so having that other person there is really helpful. So the next model that my examples kind of fell under was you still have one student group, but this time two teachers are teaching the same content next to each other. So both are directing the whole class lesson and they're working together to teach the lesson. So there's also often a lot of signals going back and forth. They're tossing it back and forth to each other. I think of this kind of as the morning news, and back to you. So these are how, it's kind of how I picture this. And so I thought, what is the role here of the language teacher? And I think one of my ideas was one teacher instructs and the other teacher models the thinking process of students. And so this is something I used to do a lot of times with teachers I collaborated with. So, another teacher would be teaching and I would sit and pretend I was one of the students, and I would model aloud how to kind of think through a problem. So what questions should you ask yourself? What steps should you take? And so you kind of model that for the students so that they get into that mindset and they know the process. Another way that is really kind of beneficial for students in this model is that teachers can go back and forth and show different ways to solve problems. So for example, in math, there's a few different ways to solve a multiplication problem. I'm going to show you one, and then you throw it to the other teacher who says, that's great, and here's another way to solve it, because different methods of solving resonate differently with students. So kind of going back and forth and showing students that, just because you don't get it one way doesn't mean you can't get it another way. One that I didn't type here because I kind of thought of it as different ways to solve problems, but I've worked with schools or teachers in dual language programs who had a Spanish teacher and an English teacher, and they, during their time when they are kind of bridging those languages, you can do those kind of problem solvings, the translanguaging problem solving as well. So if you don't speak the other language, you can say like, well, I don't speak that, but I can see this word kind of looks like a word I know in English. So I'm going to think that maybe it's asking this. And so you can model that, you know, metalinguistic awareness so that students, you know, realize that they're not two monolingual students in one, that they actually have a really, you know, great tool in a bilingual brain that they can use, and how are they using that. So this model really lends itself nicely to that as well. And the third one, it was one teacher teaches, one assesses. This is pretty straightforward. One teacher teaches and another teacher either assesses. Language acquisition is often something that a language specialist would want to assess. And when we think about, you know, in a remote learning thing, and I know I'm not saying this explicitly enough, but when we're talking about these models and using these, we are understanding that that this is being recorded. So it's either number one, a meeting like we're having right now, as either Zoom or Google Meets, or it's being recorded for students to watch later, right? And so these examples I'm giving kind of work in both ways. I really wanted to make sure that they worked in different contexts. So they can work if you're doing it live, like we're doing it now, or they could work if you were recording with your partner, your collaborator, for students to watch videos later. So in this one, this is a little bit different. Here, one teacher teaches and another teacher assesses the language acquisition. And that could be a few different ways. If it's a live session like this, it could be that one teacher is teaching and the other teacher, it has either a checklist, or they're doing anecdotal records or observations of, you know, the student's language performance. It could be that one teacher teaches and another teacher monitors and answers the chat. In an asynchronous format, it could be one teacher teaches and another teacher responds to or assesses the activities or the homework or whatever has been assigned to students. So there's this one gives you, I think, a little bit more freedom, and because you don't always necessarily have to be right next to each other doing something. You can, but you could also divide that work up and have one person do the instruction and one person do the assessing of either language acquisition or content. And so I'm going to stop there because those are our three models that talk about one student group. I'm going to ask Josie if there were any questions that had come in so far.
So there's been a couple of questions, Maggie, that have come in. One, I think, because so many schools are using Google Classroom, I think to make explicit to say, could you please give examples of what co-teaching looks like remotely in Google Classroom? And so that's one question that we've gotten, that we've received. There's another question also about, could you also address what this looks like when there are in-person and remote learners simultaneously, with remote learners live streaming into the class? So that's been another question. And thank you to all of you who popped up with the Andrea Honigfeld reference that Maggie talked about. I don't know, Maggie, if you want to talk a little bit more about Andrea also, since she's written so much along with Maria Dove on this topic.
Yeah, thank you, Josie. So I am a big fan of Andrea Honigfeld and Maria Dove. They have written a lot on co-teaching for English learners specifically, but they also have written a lot about using technology with English learners. So to me, they're really well versed in both of these fields, and so I see their work coming together nicely. You know, during a time like this when we're trying to collaborate and co-teach in you know, remote learning. So thank you for putting the links up there, people who have done that, because they, Andrea Honigfeld, they have a book, you guys will know the name before I will, but Collaboration and Co-Teaching for ELs. But there's one that's designed for like practitioners for the teacher, but then there's also a leader's guide. And the one that's the leader's guide is for administrators, and it goes through how do you set up a really quality co-teaching program for English learners. And it's a really fantastic book, and I would recommend it because it goes through the admin side of things. They've also written a book called ELL Frontiers about using technology with English learners, and that's only a couple years old, and that's also a really good reference if you're looking for one. So talking about, so specifically, so yeah, I'm trying to stay away from talking about specific learning management systems because there's so many being used. But when we talk about something like Google Classroom, I've seen some really interesting ways that people have used the headers in the section to show to direct students to either the live meeting. And that's one way that I think a lot of these examples work really well is with both teachers in a live meeting, either Zoom or Google Meets. I've also seen a lot of teachers use some kind of, they use emojis in the description of assignments and in the headers to kind of color code their Google Classroom so students know what needs to be done, all together, or what needs to be done independently, and when they're going to be in like a small group or a large group. So I think that was one of the to me, Google Classroom gets a little bit crowded. And so that kind of color coding was a really visual way for me to kind of see the different assignments. And I think that, especially for English learners, having that kind of color coding cue is helpful for them. Josie, I'm sorry, the second question you asked after Google Classroom was, could you remind me?
Let me unmute myself first. So this, to me, this is like the juggling ball question. Could you also address what this looks like when there are in-person and remote learners simultaneously with the remote learners live streaming into the classroom? Everything is happening at once.
Right, yeah, everything's going on. And yeah, that one it's a tough one because you have so many things happening. And you could look at it as one student group, right? It's the whole class. It's the in-person students and the virtual students all together as one. And so when we look at those first three models we talked about, we could say, I could see the first one working really well, where there's one teacher is teaching to the whole group and another teacher is kind of checking in with individuals or small groups. And that could either be number one, in person with the live students, or number two, inviting students to like breakout rooms and checking in with them and seeing, doing a little comprehension check. How are we doing? Any questions you have? Let me see your work. So that's one way. I think that really works nicely. The other way I think might be when we're talking about collaboration specifically is to think about those students as two groups. You have an in-person group and you have a remote group, because as much as we would like everyone to be all together all the time, those two groups of students have significantly different needs, right? Learning online is very different than learning in person. And learning in person while there's other students live streaming in is very different. So we, as much as we'd like to look at them as one whole group, it might help to look at them as two separate groups and say, okay, that's how we're going to separate. We're going to look at two groups of students. And that's where the kind of the next three categories come into play. And so something like this might work. So we have two teachers teaching the same content. So one teacher is teaching to group A, one teacher is teaching to group B, but they're teaching in a way that's responsive to the students' needs, right? It doesn't make sense if you have two teachers and teaching to two separate groups, but they're doing the exact same thing, right? might as well be one. But when you split the groups like that, you're splitting them to address specific needs. So in this example, one teacher teaches half the class, and the other teacher teaches the same information to the other half, but they use language and tasks that are appropriate to their English language proficiency levels. And we can think about this, you know, I'm always thinking about this through the lens of, you know, advocacy for language learners and how do we support our language learners. In reality, that's not the only thing we're trying to juggle here, right? So when we divide students up, we're looking at how are we dividing students up, you know, looking at their ELP levels, or looking at, you know, the background knowledge they have on a topic. But we also are looking at, are they live or are they remote? And if we have students live streaming in, that might be the way we separate them sometimes. You know, one teacher teaches the virtual students and another teaches the in-person students. And that could be a way to really make sure that those students are getting their needs met. The next two are very similar. So sometimes I like that they're separate and sometimes I don't because I think it is unnecessary. But one teacher pre-teaches, the other teaches alternative information. So an example could be before a unit, one teacher leads the English learner students in a conceptual preview for a new unit. So they're previewing the concept in the new academic language that they're going to encounter, while the other teacher is talking about current events with the rest of the students and doing an activity with that. The second teacher isn't moving on and saying like, well, you're behind, goodbye. They're doing something that's alternative. So the group that's kind of building that background knowledge isn't missing out. Similarly, this one happens more at the end of instruction. One teacher reteaches another teacher's alternative information. And so if we think about, I'm going to go back to this one. If we think about this one, this would be like an in-person, I said that wrong. This would be more of a synchronous example, right? One teacher is leading the EL students in a conceptual preview while the other teacher talks about current events with the students. This one is more of an idea that is asynchronous. So one way to divide up that, you know, preparation burden for teachers is, you know, one teacher says, okay, I'm going to record the lesson, I'm going to record the instruction for tomorrow, and the other teacher says, okay, I'm going to record a video that reteaches something that I know a few students didn't get. So rather than putting all of that on one teacher and saying you have to, you know, record a video to help students with something that they may not have gotten the first time, and you have to teach the, you know, record something for the new concept, you can kind of divide that up. And we could also do that with, let's go back. With this one, with the pre-teachers one, right? So before a unit, you could have one teacher record a conceptual preview that students go through, and another teacher could record something about current events, what's in the news, things like that. So they could work synchronously or asynchronously. And things like that, like recording and posting videos. We're going to talk about what I like to use to record videos, but things like that are pretty platform agnostic, right? You can record through Zoom, you can record through Google Meet, you can record, I like Screencast-O-Matic. You can use all of those, and you can post them in wherever you have. But it's not really dependent on what platform you're using. This one I found some examples because it was hard for me to explain it in sentences. So this is an example of kind of the stations, right? Two teachers are monitoring and teaching. They're monitoring students going through different stations, and they're also kind of teaching to some groups. So how does that work in the virtual realm? So one of the examples that I created, I'm going to come here. So this is an example. I made just an example like class that had different kids. So I made a couple different groups. Okay, so here are all these students groups, and they each get kind of a little schedule for the day of what they have to do at each time. At 9 they do station 1, station 2, station, etc. So these are the stations. And so when they go to station 1, it explains what it is, right? They're doing like a capital letter practice. And I'm going to be very honest with you. I was kind of all over with the different activities. I was pulling from some things I had already created and some things I have been seeing. And I wanted to show how it looked with different platforms. So if you're saying like, why would you be practicing capital letters and something else? And this seems like a little bit too complex for someone who's still doing capital letters. I get it. So this could be so this tells students to go to your Google Classroom, find capitalization practice under classwork, complete the activity and submit the assignment. Then they can go back to the doors. Then at the time they have, when they go to station 2, they have to read this article. They can click here to listen. 4 is listening to a read aloud through YouTube, and then responding on Flipgrid. And we're going to look at Flipgrid when I talk about tools that you should have in your toolbox. So listen to the story, go to Flipgrid and tell us about your name, and watch your classmates' videos. And then the last 2 are working with teachers. So teachers can monitor those first 3 groups by the work that's turned in, right? They can't monitor in real time necessarily, but they can monitor through the work that's submitted. These last 2 stations are direct work with students in small groups. So this teacher would post the Zoom link, and so the students would go to that link at their time, and they would work in their small groups. And then the same for station 5. And so this is kind of how I thought about what could it look like if you were trying to do this kind of station idea, collaboration with another person, using a platform like Google Classroom, using some asynchronous and some synchronous strategies. You don't necessarily need the little door pictures. I just do that because I think it's fun. And sometimes it's a little engaging for students. The next link here is virtual station rotations. And so this is a website that I hope this is where I got actually the template for this presentation. It's called Slidesmania. But on Slidesmania, they have a lot of really cool Google Slide templates. So this one is that someone created for a virtual station rotation. So this is another example of how someone conceptualized that. And then you could go through and then you can just borrow this, right? You can make a copy, it's yours, and then you can kind of tweak it to be whatever you need to be. That has other ones. So there are other ones that would, other templates that would kind of work in this model of collaboration. There are a lot of choice boards, there's some challenge boards, and those I think could be tweaked to work as some kind of, station activity that teachers are monitoring either asynchronously, after the fact, or they're monitoring students doing it in real time. And this could work for classrooms where there are virtual students live streaming into the classroom, right? Everyone could work from the same choice board, and the teacher could see what they were doing on that board. So next we have any questions?
Hi, Maggie. Yes.
Hi.
Luis Correa asked the following question. So before implementing these models, there needs to be a significant amount of planning and preparation, for example, learning goals, roles and responsibilities, assessment, etc. How can teachers establish parity in a remote environment? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a very good point. So all of this does require a, preparation. I can't think of anything that would be worth your while to do that didn't require some significant preparation and building that partnership between people, because you have to you have to understand the other person. You also have to trust the other person, because you're working with them, and you're oftentimes giving responsibility, to them, and you're taking part of the responsibility. So it's really important that you trust each other that way. As for establishing parity, I there's kind of like two sides of the coin. One is, if you had time to do this and kind of start slow and build the relationship, you would want to get to know each other, get to know each other's routines in the classroom. What are your core values in the classroom? What are my core values in the classroom? Who am I as a person? Who are you as a person? And really start to get to know each other and build that relationship. In this situation, often we don't really have that time. We're pushed together really quickly. So one way to establish parity is to always be flipping these roles. If it's always the content teacher teaching the big group and the language specialist is pulling out, 3 kids to the back table, it's never going to look like it's an equal playing field. You have to switch those roles. And so you have to have the language teacher teach the bigger group, or the language teacher, be in charge of the content. And then the content teacher maybe works with a smaller group of language learners, or maybe works with and focuses on academic language in their group. And, it's builds that parity, because students and teachers are seeing that they're, these teachers are flip-flopping, so they're equal, right? But it also is good for teachers just to see what other people doing, kind of, walk in someone else's shoes, I think. So, when I would collaborate with other people when I was in the classroom, and we would kind of switch roles, I would be like, well, that's not how I would do it, but then it would really work. And I'd be like, oh, well, maybe I should be doing it that way, right? I'd never even thought of trying to do trying to do X, Y, Z that way. Like, that's a really great idea. And you're learning from each other as you're kind of, watching each other teach. So I think that's one way, is making sure that you're not static in those roles, that those roles are really fluid.
Okay, and then I think it merits just to say one more time, there was a question about, again, if you want to repeat again, the specific resources, and again, the book article that corresponds to your entire PowerPoint. I know you have your bit.ly at the bottom, but if you want to repeat it one more time for people, that'd be good.
Repeat the bit.ly, or repeat?
Repeat the resources that are corresponding to this entire presentation, besides Maggie Essig, of course. So
got it. Yeah, I will, after this presentation, I can put links to the Honingsfeld and Dove books. They have these 7 models, but they're very similar to the models that you'll see, like if you were to read about co-teaching in special ed or co-teaching in gifted education. Everybody has kind of the same models. It's just kind of how they label them. And Honingsfeld and Dove specifically talk about co-teaching for language development and content learning of English learners. But I definitely will put that in the link. One thing we're going to go to next is look at more of the resources. So one thing, I was laughing earlier when Josie was introducing me, because she was saying how much I loved everything technology, and I really do. I think it's really great. And then my advice is like to keep it simple, strip it down, right? There's a lot going on, and we don't need to have 45,000 different technology tools that we're juggling in the air, right? Just for technology's sake. You want to really make sure that what you're choosing is meaningful and is helping students acquire language and is helping students learn content, right? So when we're working together, and either collaborating in a more general sense, or if you're actually co-teaching, right? Co-planning, co-teaching, co-assessing, co-reflection. Read or create the lesson. Identify what are the core understandings, and that's really key. Like, what do you need students to walk away knowing? When they leave that room, or they leave their kitchen, they leave the, Google Meets, what do you want them to walk away with? There's a lot of things I'd be like, oh, that'd be cool if they remembered it. They'd be cool if they got that. But like, what is essential? What can't you live without them knowing? And then go through the lesson and highlight areas that are going to need scaffolds and supports. So this is an example my colleague Michelle Yunong made. These are it's 10 categories of support types for language learners, but go through your lesson and see like, where are we going to need pictures or photographs? Where might we need a song or a chant or some realia? Where might we need to have some nonverbal response options? Go through and see what parts are going to need linguistic supports. Here we go. And here we go. So go through and highlight those parts. Find out where they're going to need. Think about the students' English language development level. Think about needs of any students with special education needs or 504 needs, any gifted students. Think about your students' learning styles or personalities, or just kind of how your class, goes about things. If your class is part virtual and part in person, right? That's a big part of the profile of your class. And after you go through and highlight where those supports are needed, create your prep list. What do we have to do? Here's a list of everything that needs to happen. And then go through and read it kind of a third time, read that lesson a third time, and see what kind of collaboration works best in this situation, right? And then assign those tasks and go co-prepare what you're doing, right? That's really kind of the simplest way you can do it. And I think, to me, I think in like charts in my head, this was how it would look to me, right? Here's, I write the lesson plan in that left column. In the middle column, I think I'm going to note where those scaffolds or linguistic supports are needed. And then in that right-hand column, note how we're going to collaborate, how we're going to work together, right? It may be synchronously, it may be live. We're both going to be on the Zoom meeting, right? It may not be. It may be you're going to teach live, and then I'm going to record a video that kind of rehashes things and helps students, or that gives them a little extra practice if they need it. So there's a few different things that that could do, but this is like the easiest way I see in my head. Here's the lesson. What language scaffolds do we need, and how are we going to collaborate on this? And when we look, so there's now starting to be some, like a good amount of research coming out about virtual learning or, remote learning during COVID. And what the research is saying is that, above all, nurture relationships. They're the key to learning. So make sure that your collaboration involves getting to know the students, right? And also getting to know each other, right? The stronger you have a relationship with the person you're collaborating with, the better that collaboration is going to turn out. One thing the research is saying is, and I know this is not super popular with everyone, is make cameras optional. It adds a big social, I don't know, what's the word? It can add a lot of social anxiety to a situation when students have to, either constantly, be on staring at the camera, or if they're not really, they don't want to show their background. It's almost, I was reading that it was, imagine how awkward and nervous you are as an adolescent, and then say, like, now everyone can see into your room, right? Like, that's such an invasion. And so that can add a lot of anxiety to a situation. And when we talk about our language learners, anything that adds anxiety to a situation raises their affective filter, and it puts that affective filter up, and any kind of language learning that you hope is happening won't happen. So that's something to consider. Find a supportive network. And this is not like your internet network. This is who is your tribe? Who is supporting you? What blogs do you read? Where do you get some of your ideas? Like, I belong to like 3 or 4 different ELL based Facebook groups that people like talk and ask questions and help each other. And I find it really kind of invigorating that people are helping each other. And I'm like learning all these things and seeing what people are creating. It's, a really great thing for me to look at. But find something that's supporting you. And it could be, people in your school or in your hall, right? That's part of your supportive network. Who's your personal learning network? And then find technology that lets you do what you're good at, right? Don't think like, because we're using technology, I got to throw everything out and I got to start from new and get all new strategies and everything's has to be brand new. No, find the technology that supports what you know that works, right? As a teacher, right, teachers know what works for them and what students respond to, and let's help them find technology that lets them do that better. And then keep it simple. So here are, so like focus on a few key tools that can be used in multiple contexts. So I do love technology, but I think like if I had to juggle, 36 different technology tools in a week, I would not make it out alive, right? It would be too much for me. It's like that little emoji, the mind blown emoji. So what needs to be in your toolkit? Something that allows you to screencast, so you can work your computer and record yourself talking about something and helping students and recording your own videos. So Screencast-O-Matic is what I use. Screencastify is what other people use. They both have free versions where you can record free movies. Flipgrid, which I'm going to show you, just incorporated screencasting into its platform too, so you can use Flipgrid now to screencast. So that's cool. Flipgrid is my favorite. It's a discussion board, but with videos instead of discussion. So this is one the IRC specialist made a couple years ago. This is what it looks like on the teacher end. People record videos and you can see them, and then you can respond to videos. What it looks like on the student end is this. Students can record a response if they logged in, right? And Flipgrid has a lot of great ideas for remote learning. So I'm not going to reiterate all of those, but they do have some good resources that if you're looking for it, things you can. Flipgrid also has a really great activity library. And so things that collaborate with Wonderopolis, different museums. There are activities ready-made for you to try out. And then there's also topics that you can search for. So if you want to search for something with, where are we? Language learners, you can filter for that. If you want elementary language learners, here we go. So there's a lot of great activities you can do. So this is a great way for students to practice speaking and to kind of build community with each other if they don't have the time, if they're during their class meetings, if they don't have time when asynchronously, this is a good way for them to start to talk to each other in a way that is kind of slower paced for them. The next tool is Padlet. And so Padlet's like a digital corkboard. So here's one I did about, it's in a lesson I taught about like your identity and your name. What I like about Padlet is when you go to write something, you could type your post, but you could also insert a link, a file, a picture. You could do a film, you could record your voice, you could record your screen, so you could screencast, you could draw. These are all really great entry points for language learners who may not feel super comfortable writing or typing, right? Gives them an opportunity to either screencast or use their voice or draw something. It gives them a lot of entry points to talk to each other and collaborate. Another tool I think that's really cool is Jamboard, which is Google's collaborative whiteboard. So these are some activities that I was just playing around with. We'll see, we'll put up plant word wall. But this is, so I could have a whole class on here and I could say, here's the whole class word wall, let's add to it. Or I could say, I want to have, oh, it's not letting me, I'm not logged in. So I could say everybody gets their own word wall that you're going to create. And so everyone could have their own one in this collaborative whiteboard. So Jamboard is a really great tool. People are really, using it more and more. it may be a lot of places have it blocked. Like even at the IRC, it was just default blocked until July when I said, you know, I really like to use Jamboard. So, and then it was unlocked. So it's really something that if you're looking for a whiteboard to use with students and to collaborate, it's something to look into. And then the last one is, you know, a thing to use, a tool to share videos with students. And how do we share them and make them a little bit more interactive and a little bit more of a give and take? And so Edpuzzle lets you insert questions or insert voice comments for students as they're watching a video to help them kind of focus their learning. So this is for me, a great way to kind of share videos and kind of, you know, get some feedback about how students are, you know, doing as they're watching it. So I see we're running out of time. Josie, were there any questions that came up?
Again, for you to repeat the support groups, the bilingual ELL support groups that are out there
okay.
for people to join.
Yeah, I will definitely. Right after this, I will put links to them on a slide, okay?
Perfect.
Okay, and then these are things that I've been gathering as I've been like preparing this or doing things. So they didn't really fit anywhere, but I like to pass along these resources to you. And if you have any questions, email me and I will add a slide right after we're done with the resources that we talked about during this session.
Great. Thanks so much, Maggie. Terrific presentation. And I want to thank everybody, all of you. I didn't say it enough at the beginning. What tremendous effort all of you out in districts and across the state are doing on behalf of English learners. You are our heroes. So thanks so much for that. And one last plug for Maggie's blog that can be found on the IRC website. So another support network as well. So we'll be coming back at 11 o'clock for the Q&A on assessments. So we'll see you in a little under an hour. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of the morning until 11 o'clock. Bye-bye.